When I opened my eyes at 6 in the morning, the first thing I noticed was the unnatural silence in my home. For 67 years, my morning routine had been identical. The creak of the oak floorboards, the smell of fresh coffee, and the peaceful hum of the orchard outside. But that morning, my bedroom door stood wide open, and 3 large black suitcases were stacked neatly at the foot of my bed. I sat up, my heart hammering against my ribs, and reached instinctively under my pillow. The heavy, sealed manila envelope I had placed there 2 nights ago was gone. Downstairs, voices murmured in the kitchen. I threw on my bathrobe and walked down the hallway, every step feeling like a stone dragging through mud. Standing around my dining table were my 32-year-old daughter, Clara, her husband, Greg, and a man in an expensive charcoal suit holding a leather briefcase. Resting right in front of the lawyer on the polished mahogany table was the exact envelope Clara had pulled from under my pillow while I slept. "Morning, Dad," Clara said, her voice smooth, calm, and coated in a terrifying kind of artificial tenderness. She didn't look me in the eye as she poured coffee into my favorite mug. "Don't be alarmed. Greg and I packed your clothes for you. The car is coming at 8 to take you to Shady Pines Senior Living. It's time, Dad. You're getting forgetful, and this house, well, it's far too big for a lonely old man." "You went into my bedroom while I was sleeping, Clara?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, trembling not from fear, but from the crushing weight of betrayal. "You took something from under my pillow?" Greg stepped forward, folding his arms across his chest with a smug, dismissive grin. "We did what was necessary, Robert. You've been hiding documents. You've been acting paranoid. Clara has power of attorney now, signed off by the county court last Friday. Everything in this house, including the farm and the valley land, belongs to the trust family now, and as the corporate representative of that trust, Clara is making the call." I looked at Clara, my little girl, the child I had carried on my shoulders through the apple orchards after her mother died 20 years ago. I had sacrificed every single comfort, worked 16-hour days in the soil, and sacrificed my own health to build Oak Ridge orchards into a multi-million-dollar organic supply operation, all so she would never know a single day of hardship. "Clara," I said softly, stepping closer to the table, "you really believe you have the power to put me away?" "It's for your own good, Dad," she replied, her eyes cold as stone. She pointed to the attorney sitting at the table. "This is Mr. Harrison. He's the senior probate partner at Sterling Legal. He's here to oversee the estate transfer and make sure you sign the final medical release quietly."
Mr. Harrison adjusted his glasses, looking visibly uncomfortable as he slid the manila envelope toward himself. "Mr. Vance, your daughter presented court paperwork claiming you were incapacitated. She instructed me to inspect all estate records found on the premises, including whatever was sealed in this envelope." "Go ahead and open it, Mr. Harrison," Clara urged, leaning against the counter. "It's probably just old land deeds or some gibberish he wrote when he was confused. Let's get this over with so the transport van can load his bags." Mr. Harrison broke the red wax seal on the envelope. He slid out a thick, handwritten letter accompanied by 3 official certified deeds stamped with federal seals. As his eyes scanned the first paragraph of the letter, the color slowly drained from the attorney's face. His hand began to shake. "Mrs. Gregg," Mr. Harrison stammered, his professional composure shattering in an instant. Where did you say you found this?" "Under his pillow while he was asleep," Greg interrupted impatiently. "What does it matter? It's just an old man's rambling. Read it out loud so he realizes he's lost and stops resisting." Mr. Harrison looked up at me, his eyes wide with horror, then looked down at the parchment. I think you both need to sit down," the lawyer whispered, his voice trembling violently. "Because if what is written here is legally binding, God help us all." To understand how my own daughter could stand in my kitchen, watch 3 suitcases of my belongings sit by my bed, and try to ship me off to an asylum, you have to go back 14 months to the day I collapsed in the orchard during the autumn harvest. It was a hot Tuesday in late September. I had been out in the sun since dawn, managing 40 workers as we loaded crates of apples onto distribution trucks. My head spun, my vision blurred, and the next thing I knew, I woke up in the county hospital with IV tubes running into my arm. The doctor told me it was severe heat exhaustion and dehydration, but he advised me to take a step back and rest for a few months. That night, Clara came to my hospital room. She held my hand, tears streaming down her face. "Dad, you scared me to death," she sobbed, pressing her forehead against my knuckles. "You can't keep working like this. You've done enough for me. Let Greg and me move into the main house to take care of you. We can handle the farm management while you rest." At that moment, my heart overflowed with gratitude. I thought God had blessed me with a devoted daughter who genuinely cared for my well-being. I smiled, kissed her forehead, and told her she was the greatest gift her mother had ever left me. 2 weeks later, Clara and Greg moved into the estate. At first, everything seemed peaceful. Clara cooked meals, Greg took over the daily meeting with our orchard supervisors, and I spent my afternoons sitting on the porch, reading books and enjoying a slow pace of life I hadn't known in 40 years.
"Don't worry about my father," Clara said, her voice completely devoid of emotion. "He's old and weak. We've already laid the groundwork with a local physician to document his cognitive decline. In a few months, I'll file for full conservatorship. We'll move him to a private care facility out of state, sell the land to the developers, and execute the payout before he even realizes what happened." I stood frozen behind the leaves, unable to breathe. My chest felt as though an iron band was tightening around my lungs. The daughter I had poured my life into, the girl whose college tuition I had paid in full, the child I had comforted through every tear, was actively plotting to destroy my mind, steal my legacy, and lock me away in an asylum for money. I didn't storm out of the greenhouse. I didn't scream or confront them. Decades of running a hard business had taught me one vital truth. When you are surrounded by predators, impulsive anger is your worst enemy. Patience is your only shield. That night, I locked my bedroom door and cried silently into my pillow. The emotional betrayal was far more painful than any physical wound. My own flesh and blood viewed me as nothing more than an obstacle standing between me and $12 million. Over the next 4 months, I played the ultimate game of patience. I allowed them to believe their plan was working flawlessly. When Clara gave me fake memory tests at the dinner table, asking if I remembered what I ate for breakfast, I deliberately hesitated and gave vague answers. When Greg spoke to me in condescending tones, I nodded vacantly and stared out the window. I let them build a false sense of absolute victory. Meanwhile, behind their backs, I began my own quiet investigation. I knew I couldn't rely on local authorities or lawyers in our small town. Greg had already established ties with several local officials. I needed someone outside their sphere of influence. I called an old military buddy from my days in the Army Corps of Engineers, a retired federal investigator named Arthur Pendleton. Arthur came to the farm under the guise of an old friend visiting for tea. Over 2 hours, while Clara and Greg were out in the city shopping for new sports cars on credit, I laid out everything I had overheard. Arthur looked at me grimly. "Robert, if they've already secured a fraudulent preliminary conservatorship filing through a compromised local doctor, they can legally seize your home within weeks. You need a rock-solid counter strategy. Do you have any hidden assets or secondary contracts they don't know about?
But within 3 months, subtle shifts began to occur. It started with small things. I went to the local farm supply store to pick up fertilizer for our greenhouse, only to discover that my personal contractor account had been converted into a restricted sub-account. When I asked the store owner, an old friend named Hank, why my authority was limited, he looked at his computer screen with pity. "Robert, Clara came in last week," Hank said quietly, leaning over the counter. "She presented a temporary medical management notice. She told us you were struggling with short-term memory loss and that all farm expenditures had to be routed through Greg's approval." My stomach turned. Memory loss? Hank, I forgot a single invoice number 3 weeks ago. "I know, Robert," Hank sighed, "but she had official paperwork signed by a notary. I didn't want to get involved in family business." I drove straight home, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. When I confronted Clara in the living room, she offered a warm, patronizing smile and smoothed down my collar. "Oh, Dad, don't get worked up. It's just a financial precaution. The doctor said you needed to avoid stress. Greg is just handling the heavy lifting, so you don't confuse the vendor accounts." I wanted to believe her. I wanted so desperately to trust my child that I swallowed my pride, nodded, and let it go. But the microaggressions didn't stop. A month later, I walked into the home office to check our annual revenue reports, only to find the door locked with a newly installed digital keypad. When I asked Greg for the code, he laughed offhandedly, patting my shoulder as if I were a small child. "No need to worry your head with tax balances, old man. Clara and I hired a new accounting firm from the city. Just enjoy your retirement." That night, I sat in the dark on the back porch, watching the moon rise over the rows of apple trees my late wife Sarah and I had planted with our own hands 30 years ago. A deep, cold knot of dread began to form in my chest. Why was Clara isolating me from the business? Why was she telling local merchants I was losing my mind? The answer arrived 3 weeks later in the most heartbreaking way possible. I was working quietly in the greenhouse at the edge of the property, repairing an irrigation valve, when I heard footsteps approaching outside. It was Clara and Greg, walking with an unfamiliar man wearing a high-end designer suit. They didn't know I was inside behind the tall ficus plants. "The entire property is 94 acres, Greg was saying, his voice filled with a greedy excitement I had never heard before. "The soil is prime real estate. Once we clear the apple trees, a private commercial developer from Chicago wants to build a luxury resort and golf course here. The land valuation is around $12 million. "And what about your father?" the stranger asked. "The deed I reviewed lists Robert Vance as the sole title holder." Clara's response shattered my soul into 1,000 pieces. I looked out the window at the rolling hills of the orchard. A quiet smile touched my lips for the first time in months. "Arthur, my wife Sarah wasn't just a farmer's wife. Her family owned the original land grant for this entire county dating back to 1912. When we got married, we didn't just build an orchard. We created a protected agricultural land trust." "What does that mean?" Arthur asked, leaning in. "It means," I whispered, "that 30 years ago, Sarah and I signed an irrevocable secondary deed. The main farmhouse and 40 acres sit on land that was legally transferred into an independent educational foundation for agricultural conservation the day Sarah died. I am merely the lifetime trustee. I don't own the land personally. The foundation does. And according to the trust bylaws, if any relative attempts to sell or commercialize the soil for non-agricultural development, the entire estate, including all personal assets held in family accounts, instantly reverts to an independent board of directors." Arthur gasped.
Does Clara know about this secondary deed?" "No," I said softly. "Sarah and I kept it in a private vault at the state capitol. Clara always assumed the entire 94 acres were held under a simple residential title. She was so blinded by her greed for the $12 million developer offer that she never conducted a deep title search at the Federal Land Registry." "So, what's your plan, Robert?" Arthur asked. "I'm going to let her push her betrayal to the absolute limit," I replied, my eyes burning with a calm, terrifying determination. "I'm going to let her execute her legal trap, and at the exact moment she thinks she has stripped me of everything, I will hand her the truth." Over the next 6 weeks, the psychological warfare in my home escalated to unbearable levels. Clara began replacing my personal photos on the walls with modern art. Greg started bringing contractors onto the porch, measuring the front yard for bulldozer paths right in front of me. Every night, I would lie in bed, feeling the weight of the house pressing down on me. The isolation was suffocating. My daughter barely spoke to me unless she was giving me orders or reminding me to take my vitamins, pills I quietly flushed down the toilet every single morning. 2 weeks ago, I received an anonymous phone call from a clerk at the county courthouse. "Mr. Vance," the girl whispered into the receiver, "your daughter's attorney just filed an emergency motion for involuntary medical relocation. They've scheduled a transport van to pick you up on the morning of the 21st. That was the moment I knew the final curtain was about to rise. I drove to the state capitol the next day, retrieved the original 1912 land grant deed, the irrevocable trust documents, and the audit reports proving Greg had been embezzling money from the farm's payroll accounts to cover his personal gambling debts in the city. I sat down at my desk in a quiet hotel room and wrote a long 11-page handwritten letter to my daughter. It wasn't a letter of anger. It was a confession of a father's broken heart, detailed with every memory of her childhood, every sacrifice her mother and I had made, and the complete, undeniable legal reality of what she had done. I sealed the letter, the deeds, and the forensic audit in the heavy manila envelope. 2 nights ago, I slipped the envelope directly under my pillow before going to sleep, knowing with absolute certainty that Clara's greed would drive her to search my room before the transport van arrived. Which brings us back to my dining room on that cold 6 o'clock morning. The fluorescent light hummed overhead. 3 black suitcases stood by the stairs. Clara and Greg stood near the kitchen counter with smug smiles, waiting for their attorney, Mr. Harrison, to read what they assumed was the final ramblings of a defeated, senile old man. Instead, Mr. Harrison was standing at the table, frozen, his face ghost white, his hands trembling violently as he read the second page of the letter under my pillow. "Mr. Harrison," Greg snapped, stepping toward the table with an angry frown. "What the hell is wrong with you? Read the damn paper. We have a transport van arriving in 20 minutes. Mr. Harrison slowly raised his head, looking at Clara and Greg with an expression of pure, unadulterated horror. "You idiots!" Mr. Harrison whispered, his voice cracking with panic. "You utter, absolute fools!" "Excuse me," Clara shouted, her artificial tenderness completely vanishing. "How dare you speak to us like that? We are paying your firm." "Not any more, you're not," Mr. Harrison yelled, slamming his hand onto the table. "Do you have any idea what your father put in this envelope? This isn't a personal letter. This is an official notice of irrevocable trust activation, accompanied by a federal land registry deed." Clara froze, the smirk on Greg's face instantly evaporated. What are you talking about?" Clara stammered, her voice suddenly small and terrified. "The land belongs to the Vance Family Trust. I have power of attorney." "Your power of attorney is completely worthless," Mr. Harrison shouted, pulling out the certified federal documents. "Your father doesn't own Oak Ridge Orchards as a private individual. The entire 94 acres were legally placed into the Sarah Vance Agricultural Conservation Foundation in 1994. Robert Vance is merely the lifetime managing trustee." Greg lunged forward, grabbing the papers from the table, his eyes scanning the dense legal text frantically. "No, this is fake. It's a trick. We have a contract with a Chicago developer for $12 million. If you attempt to execute that commercial sale, the automatic breach clause in this trust instantly triggers a full asset seizure. Every single dollar held in your family accounts, every bank asset you managed under your power of attorney, and the title to this very house are immediately transferred to the State Agricultural Board."
A suffocating, deathly silence descended upon the room. Clara turned her head slowly, looking at me as if she were seeing a complete stranger for the first time. The arrogance, the coldness, the condescending pity, all of it vanished, replaced by an overwhelming wave of sheer terror. "Dad," Clara whispered, taking a trembling step toward me, her voice breaking. "Dad, you knew? You knew the whole time?" I stood perfectly straight in my wrap robe, looking at my daughter with deep, quiet dignity. "I knew the moment you stood in the greenhouse 4 months ago and sold my life's work for $12 million, I said softly, my voice echoing through the silent kitchen. "I knew every time you lied to my face. I knew every time you told our neighbors I was losing my mind. I stayed quiet because I wanted to see how far your own daughter would go before her conscience stopped her. But your conscience never woke up, Clara." "Dad, please," Clara sobbed, tears finally streaming down her face as she reached out to grab my arm. "I'm your daughter. I'm your little girl. You can't do this to me." I looked down at her, the heart in my chest feeling heavier than it ever had in my entire life. I gently pulled my robe from her grip. "I didn't do this to you, Clara," I said, a single tear finally escaping my weathered cheek and running down my weathered cheek. "You did this to yourself. You sacrificed your father for money, and now money is all you have left."
The officers escorted Greg out to the cruiser. Clara was served with an immediate eviction order and criminal summons for elder abuse fraud and falsification of medical records. Mr. Harrison packed his briefcase without saying another word, tipped his hat to me in shame, and hurried out the door. By 8 o'clock in the morning, the sirens had faded into the distance. The police cars were gone. The driveway was empty. I walked slowly upstairs to my bedroom. I picked up the 3 black suitcases Clara and Greg had packed for me while I slept, carried them downstairs one by one, and placed them in the hall closet. Then I walked into the quiet kitchen. I filled the copper kettle with cold tap water, placed it on the stove, and turned on the burner. The soft, familiar blue flame flickered to life. While the water heated, I walked into the living room and sat down in my old armchair by the window. On the small side table sat a framed photograph of my late wife, Sarah, holding a 3-year-old Clara in her arms under the blooming apple trees. Justice had been delivered. My home was safe. My legacy was protected, and the farm would remain an orchard forever. But as I sat alone in the quiet house, watching the morning sun break over the horizon, the silence felt louder than it had ever had before. I had saved my land, but I had lost my daughter, and no amount of truth, justice, or victory could ever heal the quiet, aching void left in a father's heart.